This is Warren Vanderhill with the Center for Middletown Studies project on school consolidation. And this evening, October 15th, 2014, I'm interviewing Tony Costello, the president of the Muncie School Board. And I'd like to begin by thanking you for agreeing to participate in our project. I'd like to ask you initially if you could tell me a little bit about the work of the Blue Ribbon Task Force on the future of the Muncie Community Schools and what years later became consolidation.
Sure. Well, trying to think chronologically, I guess 5 or 6 years into this decade, past decade, excuse me, about 2005, I think 2006, it became quite evident that our population and therefore our K-12 enrollment was on a steady decline. Of course, we had gone through the big decline with all the gear and Westinghouse and all those leaving earlier, but I think we were seeing a little bit of the residuals of some of the smaller companies that had relied on them were now struggling. So, very honestly, I believe it would have been under Dr. King or maybe Marlon Creasy, but anyway, there was the notion that we need to really, as a community, take a real serious look at what's going to happen to our school district. And at that time, of course, the state was already making some pretty substantial cuts in financing. The tax caps were about to kick in or had kicked in. Property tax and the tax caps and then the protected taxes. So things looked pretty bleak for our district and any district, but especially those like us that were losing students. The charter schools were kind of minimum, but certainly were taking some students away. And I think there was a notion that we need to really for the first time in a while, really take a long-term look at what were we going to do. We had buildings that were running at 50% capacity, i.e. out to high schools. On the other hand, we had just built a pretty new middle school, and we had put about $23,000 into Southside High School to bring that up to, I think now that it's a middle school, probably fine as
23,000, is that?
23 million.
Okay, I was going to say 23,000 wouldn't get you 5 books.
No, $23 million of complete renovation, including building a second gymnasium. It's got probably the finest pool of any middle school in this, we just aren't building middle schools or pools in the middle schools anymore. So this was formed, the idea being that there would be representation from every possible sector, business sector, education sector. Certainly there were members of the board on that. There was simply what we would call citizens who had a long-standing interest in the school by their involvement with parent-teachers associations, or so it really was a quite diverse representation.
This is 30-some people.
Yeah, 30-something people. Yeah. And if you look down the names, there were some, very important people. There were university educators like Dr. Alice Bennett on it, and I was on it and served until I decided to run for a school board and then removed my name as a kind of conflict of interest. The school board hired 2 gentlemen, and I want to say from Noblesville, but they were former superintendents and had become really educational consultants and had done this for a number of districts. Basically, kind of system-wide planning for districts that were both expanding, Hamilton County districts, or contracting, like Muncie, Anderson, Marion, so on and so forth. And out of that came a pretty substantial study that probably the most important thing was it really presented a series of options of what could be done. You could remain 2 high schools and consolidate the middle schools. The idea was that we could nickel and dime our budgets, but it came down to pretty much we're going to have to close a minimum of 1 building, possibly 2 buildings. I mean, that was where we were going to start to get some financial numbers that were going to really help us. And then, of course, there were other options were to consolidate our 9 elementary schools into 3 super elementary schools. And each of these had constituents, very interestingly enough. On the other hand, there were also very, very strong groups that really became advocates for, you're not closing Southside High School.
Okay.
I mean, right out of the gate,
Right.
that was pretty much known, that historic divide, if you will, of that and what it meant to the city. And a little later on, I'll tell you that I had former involvements with the Southside. So although I was accused of being insensitive to them, I actually at one meeting had it and kind of ran down my list of what I considered contributions to the Southside. What it finally came down to then was the fact that we were very, very, how should I say, we believed very strongly that although they're not like the old neighborhood schools like you and I knew, where Emerson served 20 blocks, but for us to have 9 elementary schools, people still considered them their elementary schools. And if you take a look, they served a fairly concentrated geographic area. Many times, kind of like Halterman Village was Mitchell, and graduate student housing from Ball State. Westview, where my kids went, that kind of served west of Tillotson Avenue. And then when Forest Park was closed, that was actually one of the few schools that came across the tracks. To, in a sense, because both schools were, in a sense, Forest Park had gotten fairly small in enrollment. So there were some historical things that had happened. Unfortunately, and this was brought up over and over, when there was the major bond issue, what would it have been, in the 1990s, that basically built the new Wilson Middle School, improved Westview, Northview, Grissom, and Sutton. No, Grissom and Sutton were fairly new. Anyway, they brought those schools up to the parity where the kids didn't eat in the same room that they just had gym in. And as you well know with Westview. So they got gymnasia. Oh, I know. Yeah, so it was those two, and then Muncie Central got major upgrades, typically HVAC, but Southside, of course, got, and that building had been built in '62, and except for I think an 8-room addition, had really never been upgraded. And that $23 million renovation literally rendered that building a new building. I mean, it was a gut rehab. And it was, and the people there were absolutely ecstatic. Believing that they always had the short shift on things. So finally, I guess if you want to say it finally came down to saying, well, what we really believe from what we're hearing, although certainly during the town meetings, we still heard of people that got up there and said, build 2 super elementary schools, and then very interestingly, what caught fire and had of interest to me was, what about 2 7 through 12 schools? Which I went to after we moved out of New York City. That was pretty standard, 7, 12, and it was, then people said, 7th graders and 12, that whole drill. But what we did is we felt it had gained enough of a constituent support that Ermeline Faulkner actually did a space-by-space study of both schools. Which basically would have been Southside and Wilson together, and then Northside and Muncie Central together. The second one could be accommodated in the space of Muncie Central. Southside could not accommodate all the kids from Wilson.
It wasn't big enough.
It wasn't big enough. And that, amazingly, people would not accept that. So Ermeline literally had to go and show space. But I think we would have had to build 16 new classrooms. And I'm not going to mention names, but there were people saying, well, what are all these spaces? Well, they were all locker rooms and shower rooms. So you can't use those for classrooms, Yeah, exactly. And so that kind of hit its apex, and that's kind of the way the town meetings went. There were things that rose and got support, and then things that simply were eliminated as not possible.
We'll go back to the Blue Ribbon Committee. So the Blue Ribbon Committee sent a bunch of recommendations to the school board.
Right, it was a
then
report.
constituted.
Right, it was a report.
So you had different superintendent than now, different school board than now.
That's correct.
And so there's a transition here where you get the recommendations from the Blue Ribbon Task Force, then you have a new superintendent, and then you have new members of the school board.
Correct.
So they've got these recommendations to consider, and then
Right.
you move on from there.
That's exactly right. With the constant, what should I say? With the constant notion that we are continuing to lose more and more financial support from the state.
Right.
So every year, our budget is continuing to shrink.
Right.
And so it's getting, in a way, more critical that we make some major decisions. And it was no longer, I mean, I think anybody that would be objective would say you cannot support two high schools running at 50% capacity.
Okay.
The other thing, very honestly, is we were running AP and honors courses that we had no right in running, with 6 students here, 8 down there. You know, but if you combine typically both of those,
And you're okay.
you got at least around 13 to 15,
Yeah.
which 15 for us, but you know, with some of the higher level AP, we would say if you're above 12,
You're okay.
we've got to offer those because we owe it to our students.
You're on the school board now.
Right.
Okay, you as a member of the school board, new superintendent. When did that school board, having received the report of the Blue Ribbon Task Force, you got that to consider, you're now getting closer to the last couple of years.
Right.
When did you and your fellow school board members begin discussing closing Southside High School?
Well, let's see.
Now, I want to get one thing on the record here that
Yeah.
we talked about a little bit, and that is, you can't do these things, I understand, in executive session
Oh, no.
like the Ball State Board can.
Oh, no. There is a state form in which you check off
Okay.
exactly what you're going to discuss. It primarily comes down to, we can discuss personnel matters.
Right.
We can discuss contract with the MTA matters.
Right.
And we can also discuss, actually not discuss, but we can hold a session in which an outside consultant gives us information of how to improve the board's functioning.
Okay,
Better-
in an executive session?
Yes, better communication,
Right.
Yada, yada, yada.
Right.
So, no, we are incredibly, and we are, how should I put this? There is a pretty good, consistent group of people that are looking very closely.
Okay.
And we've been accused almost every meeting of, well, that's a fait accompli, that's already decided, you'd simply come out here and vote
Yeah.
5-0, and so on and so forth. And we try to be very careful. All of us attend, twice a year, we go to a full-day law seminar offered by the IU Law faculty. And I have to say, excellent quality.
Okay.
And I never knew there was so much school law, but there are
Yes.
firms that's their major.
Yeah.
And every new thing that comes up, we are told very specifically. The last one was a total day on electronic media, and everything that's about.
Yeah.
Our students all have iPads. What are they allowed to do? What are
Yeah.
they not allowed to do? But definitely, actions of school boards are very, very tightly controlled about executive sessions.
So at some point in time then,
Go ahead.
you decide, we're gonna discuss specifically consolidating these schools
Right.
in one high school.
And I think one of the first headlines is, trying to think here, but I know there's a headline that says that we're going to consider consolidation, and I wish I had this more.
So at the board meetings, I'm gonna
That was-
I'm
yeah.
gonna assume it's, let's say, 2012 or something.
That's about right.
Yeah.
That's about right. And it is, it becomes very obvious, and of course, my background with believing
Yeah.
in community input and citizen participation
Yeah.
in the planning process. So it became quite obvious. And by the way, we would go to state school board meetings saying, did you really hold 4 community meetings outside of your board sessions? We said, yeah. And they became kind of known as town hall meetings. The old process of the citizens showing up and
Yeah.
express, and I felt very strongly that given the obvious divide, that if we did anything that wasn't in public, and I mean real in public, not limited to the 3 minutes that a citizen can talk to us during a school board meeting, and by the way, not receive any feedback. We could not respond.
Oh.
So this was kind of new territory for the Muncie Community Schools,
Yeah.
this idea of, a town hall meeting. I think what's interesting is, and I think the Muncie Urban Design Studio has played a role.
Right, yeah.
This community was a little bit knowledgeable about the charrette process, soliciting input about the White River,
Right.
Cardinal Greenway, and so I think the idea that we need to get citizen input for us to really make an informed decision.
Right.
And I think probably none of us, including myself, were really ready for the outpouring of real anger
Okay.
on the part of the Southside constituents.
I guess I'm a little surprised that you'd say that. I mean, I guess maybe I spent too much time studying Muncie as Middletown.
Right.
And maybe I've been around too many people from the south side of Muncie
Right.
who feel very strongly that there is a real, I'm going to talk more about that in a minute, but a real identification with that school. And did you think these people are going to take this in sort of a calm way?
No, and,
Oh, okay.
and the reason I can prove that is,
Yeah.
this is an article I wrote for the Muncie paper about a tale of two Muncies.
Yeah.
I am perfectly aware, and in fact, people asked me if they were literally going to build a wall along the railroad tracks,
Yeah.
because graphically I tried to show
Yeah.
that that's a psychological
Yeah.
wall.
Yeah.
Okay, and south of the tracks is alive and well
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
I think well, I'll be very honest, I told people this. I cut my teeth during the late 60s in black neighborhoods.
Right.
When once I had to get Ball State students out of an Indianapolis neighborhood with a police escort,
Yeah.
because a black kid had been shot that afternoon by
Right.
cops.
Yeah.
And they were gonna get the whiteys over
Yeah.
at this planning thing. So I mean, I've cut my teeth
Right,
into
yeah.
the anger that I felt directed at me as an individual, not at the school board, but Tony Costello.
Yeah.
I have never felt that personal anger any time in my life.
Why do you think directed at you as the president of the board?
Well, I think it's wrapped
Or
up.
some guy with a New York accent?
Well, that's not a joke.
Oh,
The threat to my life on Facebook
Yeah.
said, "Who's this guy Costello? He's obviously not from Muncie."
Yeah, right.
So 45 years of living here absolutely meant nothing.
Mhm.
And I had this guy, and I think it was Dave Collins,
Yeah.
who stood up and said, "His two boys went to Central."
Yeah.
Like, yeah, because where we live, we're
Went
in
to
the central
Central.
district. And then the whole crowd would go ballistic,
Yeah.
and it became really, well, Deb Fike was the one who most felt threatened in terms of physical threat.
Right.
And it was really, and of course, you had the, what would I say, you had the Mary Jo Barton's getting up there, always telling us she's a councilwoman,
Right.
in which you have no more standing at this meeting
Yeah.
than anybody
You're a
else. You're-
custodian.
Right, okay? And so it was very interesting, but I really felt at times there that if we didn't exit the back door and get right into the bus back to the ad building, there was a good chance that we could be physically accosted out in the auditorium.
Yeah.
So I mean, when you say,
Yeah,
and again, I worked at the South Side. I thought I contributed enough. I was a known entity,
Yeah.
but obviously known enough to still be not one of them.
Yeah. What do you think the overwhelming motivation for this really is a sense of loss?
Oh,
I mean,
without
look at what
question.
one of the other major things we're studying in the Center for Middletown Studies is deindustrialization, as you know, and the loss is plural. That part of town in particular has had to deal with over the
Absolutely.
last couple of decades. I mean, I think this is sort
Absolutely.
of like this is the last straw.
And that was actually mentioned about the fact that there's nothing else you can take away from us.
Yeah.
I mean, those were words spoken. The other thing, which was pretty obvious, and I think there was a newspaper article that in which Southsiders were quoted as saying, the North Side gets everything, we get nothing.
Yeah.
And one of the things, and again, as a, what would I say, as a designer and somebody who I like to think of dealing with the quality of cities, you know, one of the things that came out of the Southside charrette that actually my students did over at the Virginia B. Ball Center.
Yeah.
Okay, and by the way, when we presented, it was the first time Virginia Ball had ever been to Southside High School.
Oh, I'm not surprised.
Okay,
Yeah.
Joe Trimmer thought that was very significant. But seriously, that Walmart came as a result of us, in a sense, talking about the development along 29th Street
Yep.
being,
Yeah.
you know, geared and actually pulling from North Henry County and so
Yeah.
on and so forth. You know,
Which it does.
meant
Yeah.
nothing to them. And again, one of my few victories in historic preservation, but the old historic Wilson Middle School would not be there if it wasn't for me. And I don't like to use I or me,
Right,
but
right.
I saved that school.
Yeah.
I went before the school board to ask
Yeah.
for that 30-day stay of
Yeah,
execution.
they're ready to tear it down.
By the way, with the demolition contractor in the audience, ready to get the approval to start
Yeah.
to sign the contract. So, and then of course, as you know, I've been involved in affordable housing in the industry neighborhood for many, many years. So, but it meant nothing. to
No, I
me.
was gonna say, that doesn't count.
It meant absolutely
You're
nothing.
wearing a different hat now.
Well, I was wearing a different hat, and as you said, nothing was going to make them accept that they were going to have their school, and it was their school, not Muncie Community
Right,
Corporation,
right.
their school taken from them.
Yeah, that's right. When the board began talking about consolidation, I mean, you touched on this a few moments ago, but I want to get this into this
Right.
particular point in our conversation. What other options did you consider? Just so we've got to know, there's this option, this option, this option. So it wasn't just, we're going to close Southside.
No, it wasn't. During the course, as I mentioned, during the course of these 4 town meetings,
Okay.
And these came from citizens.
Right.
The 7 through 12 absolutely came from
Okay.
somebody
Okay.
who I believe had moved to Muncie from a rural district where 7 through 12 is pretty common. I mean, or if it's not in the same building, the middle
Yeah.
school is here and the high school is right here, and sometimes the elementary school is right
Yeah.
here,
Yeah.
you know. And they said, well, have you ever thought about a 7 through 12? And we said, you know, honestly, we didn't. Let us take a look at that.
Okay, but that became a financial impossibility.
It became a spatial impossibility
Okay.
because Southside,
Space finances.
yeah, okay, could not without building more, and here we are trying to close buildings, but one of the options is to build more. That just didn't make, you know, very much sense.
Okay.
The other thing we were very, very cognizant of is you've got to totally rebuild, not refurbish, but totally rebuild Southside High School, okay, which is in a hell of a lot better condition than Muncie Central at
Right.
that point.
Yeah.
And our newest building is the Wilson Middle School. So here you have 2 large investments that we're still paying off the bonds on.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're talking about the potential of closing one of these in order to be able to move those students over to the other. And I cannot tell you how many people, when I'd be shopping at Meijer, would number one say, thank you, this should have been done 10 to 15 years
I
ago.
happen to agree with that.
Yeah. I mean, when they passed that big bond issue to do
Right.
all of that, that's when, at that point, they should have looked at really the demographics of this community, where it was going,
Mm-hmm.
and even if we needed some modular classrooms for a few years to do it.
Get there.
You know, there was no doubt. I mean, I know because I evaluated that building. There was no doubt we just could not use the Wilson School anymore because of codes. I mean, you know, that building was so far from meeting state codes that we just couldn't have kids in there
Yeah.
anymore.
So you had the meetings, vitriol and all as part of the scenario. But you eventually then, as a board, had to get to the point where you didn't have any options.
No, it was yay or nay
Okay.
on, and Tim Heller will tell you this. He wanted us to use the word merger and not consolidation.
Oh, okay.
I mean, it's
Okay.
semantics, but
Oh, yeah, yeah.
we use the word merger
Okay.
in all of our stuff. And so, yeah, it came down finally, kind of if you think of distilling all the possibilities, by the time we got to here, coming out the funnel, it came down to a yay or nay on merging Central and Southside, closing Wilson, moving the middle school students to what now is going to become the Southside Middle School.
Right. Okay. And just so we get this on the record, would it be fair to say then that the real driver on this is simply fiscal?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Without question.
Yeah.
Without question. And the only other thing that at times became not a small diversion was, of course, and this was a mistake, was the school busing referendum.
Right. Right.
Because that got intertwined
Yep. Yep.
and at one point was purposely portrayed where there was a flyer that was distributed on the Sunday night before Election Day that basically said,
Yeah, I remember that.
vote no, meaning vote on buses,
And
save Southside High School.
Yeah, I do recall that.
And we had people afterwards saying, I didn't realize, I said, and as much as we said these are two totally different things,
Right.
I would recommend to every school board, don't ever overlap two items which can potentially be used, against
Well, I mean, I
each other.
recall that there was some conversation about why did you, school board, why did you have to have that ballot then? Why couldn't you put it off?
We didn't, other than with the protected taxes, namely we didn't have the option of moving funds around.
Yeah.
That we had gotten to a point with our illustrious state legislature
Right.
that we weren't going to have enough money
Oh.
to run school
So
buses.
you're just stuck.
We were stuck.
Yeah.
We were stuck between the rock and the hard place. To be very honest, and this is something that is still an issue with me at least, is we had already when I started, we had $4 million
Right.
in our rainy day account. That's a very small rainy day
Right,
account
right.
money for a corporation
Right.
with a $63 million annual. I think 10% is minimum.
Yeah.
But anyway, we took $2 million out to buy the iPads for our students
Right.
because, God forbid, Yorktown had them and Delta had them.
Yeah.
Then we buy them for students, and then we have parents coming up at every meeting saying, that was a waste of money, my student doesn't use this, and so on and so forth. And my notion was, we had several meetings with the teachers saying, look, the way students are going to use these is when you work into your lesson plans that they're going to do research on these things, or they're going to do exercises or whatever. But again, that became, and then of course the referendum was defeated, and Southside was still going to be closed, and a lot of people there really felt schnookered.
Yeah.
I mean whoa, wait a minute, because it was the fact that, I want my kid bused. Well, sorry, but so obviously we are now the state gave us a 3-year reprieve. And I testified 3 times before both Senate and legislative committees. Great work by Sue Arrington and Tim Lannon helping us. But my last statement to the committee, the Senate committee, was this is only a Band-Aid.
Yeah. Oh, it is.
School boards cannot be worried every 3 years about how they're going to fund.
Yeah.
I mean, school busing should just be a given.
it is, that's right.
We've got more important things to be considering.
Let me ask you about some, what I call points of influence.
Okay.
What role do you feel that the local business community played in all of these deliberations, if they played any role?
Well, I'll be very upfront about this because I've talked about this. One of the most frustrating things for me, and again, this is my urban planning, urban development background, is I think there are people, and these are educated businessmen, who somehow, although they may pay lip service, really don't believe that the quality of a school district is a major factor in the location or retention of businesses.
Okay.
Okay.
I would like to think that's not a position that the State Chamber of Commerce would take.
Well, the chamber has never once spoken publicly in support of any initiative on the part of the Muncie Community Schools. Now,
And you know, and I know that that's atypical. For
well,
all
and
kinds
you
of
know,
communities.
and I know, because I've been working part-time in Columbus.
Sure.
I mean, there's a community
right.
that is driven by J. Owens Miller's statement back in the 50s
Right.
saying, I need to attract and retain the best and brightest
right.
to Columbus to work at Cummins Engine.
Yep, that's right.
And he said, when I invest in Cummins, I invest in Columbus, and when I invest in Columbus, I invest in Cummins. That mindset is something, and therefore, one of the more frustrating things for me is it's difficult to promote excellence.
Right.
You know?
If you don't have the business community behind that.
Of course it is.
Yeah.
Of course it is.
Yeah.
You know, so I've always been a little bit what should I say? I've been a little bit disappointed that we haven't had more civic leaders really come to the fore and make very strong statements. How are we going to attract business here?
Yeah.
And especially when we're in competition with Hamilton County.
Oh, yeah.
And look at how many people commute from Delaware County to Hamilton or Marion County in the morning.
During the time you were involved in this, was there any what I would call overt or covert political pressure?
No, because we made sure there wasn't.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is, and I think this is absolutely known, Bev Kelly,
Right.
although I keep telling her, by the way, we serve at large. You don't represent only the Southside. Now, I know that's your constituency.
Right.
I know that's how you got elected. But you represent the entire district and what is good for the district, okay? Certainly, I was very vocal and very forthright about I want to see parity for Northside Middle School now to be brought up to what Southside Middle School is. They've always, because when they built Wilson, the reason Wilson has a pool and everything, because they said we demand parity with Northside, which was built as a high school, as you know. So it had the swimming pool, it had the theater and everything. But Bev Kelly, I remember distinctly when this whole thing started, said, I think we need to get, the mayor in here.
Okay.
And we said, the mayor doesn't have anything to do with this. He's just another citizen. But when you work in the political arena, the mayor does have something to do about it.
I'm smiling as a fellow New Yorker saying, so there was no Mayor Bloomberg in this?
No. And one of the interesting things is, of course, he was put in a tough position. Yeah. There's no doubt. Right. And when he was in a class at Central, evidently some kids asked him, straight out,
Right.
do you think that, and he said, I don't think they'll merge the schools.
Okay.
So, and I'll be very honest. I was, at a First Thursday, I was having an art exhibit at the Rose Court, and he happened to be there for the opening of this shop that sold salsa or something. It was the weirdest thing, but they really were wholesale, but they were going to do retail. So he was at an opening, then he comes down, and I'm there making final things, and he says to me, Tony, he said, closing Southside is really going to hurt Southside redevelopment. Yeah. And I just said, Mr. Mayor, I'm interested in Muncie redevelopment.
Okay.
And boy, people don't talk to him like that. Yeah. And so he just walked away. Because again, I'm not going to be a hypocrite, and I understand that. Yeah. I understand, but as a member of the corporation representing the entire city of Muncie, I need to be concerned about the whole city, not just the South Side.
But it didn't become at any point.
Oh no.
A political.
No, it didn't.
So it was never a Democrat-Republican.
No, it didn't. The mayor never came out publicly. None of the what should I say? None of the town. Well, obviously Mary Jo Barton and came out, but that was no.
That wasn't really a party. It wasn't a party.
It's really not a party thing, and I think the party leaders probably understood this was a very hot topic, and that they probably were best leaving it alone as opposed to jumping into it with potential more negatives than positives coming from. You know how they weigh everything in terms of votes. So
wouldn't help any. What do you think now having a single high school says about Muncie's economic future?
I would like to think, and I'm very proud to say, that as you well know, out of this, and I'm the one who said it, so I'll take credit for it. One day, I got so frustrated at one of these meetings, I said, if it takes the school board to ultimately arrive at one Muncie, then I'm very proud to do that. Okay. To which my colleague Bev Kelly said, that's not the role of a school board. just to give you a little bit of a sense, okay? And what I think is very interesting is this one Muncie thing has really taken off to where the mayor now in almost every speech to Rotary or everything mentions one Muncie. So I'd like to say that, I don't know about the word theory, but I'd like to say maybe something has started that unless this community does coalesce
Yeah,
into one community,
right.
and you know how often you hear public-private partnerships.
Sure.
But unless this community acts in a unified manner, there's no way we're going anywhere but where we are.
No, that's true. What do you think having a single high school says about Muncie's educational future?
I think it bodes very well for it.
Okay.
Small steps, but we've already got the first early college program for our district going. I believe Delta has one, and I think Yorktown does. I've been a great champion. As you know, I come from a blue-collar family.
Right.
I think our Muncie Area Career Center is an untapped resource in terms of vocational education.
Yeah.
And, I think the more we look at, if you read our mission statement, we talk about turning out a productive member of society, not just this rung, but, blue collar workers. And as you well know, I'm very, what would I say? I'm very cautious here, but you keep reading about somehow manufacturing is going to return to this country. And as I said, I'm very, very, I'm very leery about this. But what's interesting about that is that I see what has happened in Columbus at the Advanced Manufacturing Center. That's on the campus of IU Columbus, and was programmed by Cummins and all of the Japanese companies that have their North American headquarters there. So what they basically said is, these are the skills that we believe need to come out of a 2-year associate's program in order to, and if you can supply to Cummins, if you can supply to Caterpillar, if you can supply, I mean, we're talking about high-end Fortune 500 companies. And so I think it bodes well. I would like to think that we are going to have, and one of the things I mentioned, but again, we're going very slowly, I think Muncie Central could offer a summer AP, institute, in which we offer a lot of the AP courses that good students from Yorktown and Delta, besides ours. Because as you well know, these kids now, as you well know, a 4.0 now is nothing. So these kids are always trying to get as many AP courses in, and of course with the cost of a college course, if they can get a 4 or 5 and get it. So I'd like to think we are on the verge of a renaissance is a little too strong, but I'd like to think we are positioned to begin to move ahead.
Okay. Guarded optimism.
Guarded optimism. And the thing I said publicly again is if we wind up going through all of this and we don't have the mission of striving for excellence, then it's all been for naught. I mean, we've just changed buildings. We haven't done anything else.
In the timeline material you gave me, and I'd forgotten about this, back in 2011, there was some discussion, which was then, I guess, shelved pending further review, of a tech high school. Is that still around anywhere?
No, it's not. And very honestly, that was an initiative that a former board member, Tom Parker, really had heard from some colleagues that had, it's been in other schools. I forget which one in the Indy area is really big on that, Ben Davis. But anyway, it again.
Well, Arsenal was a tech at one point.
That's right. It was on the burner and was really gaining some status. What we finally decided was our STEM program, which are both schools, and now they're at one school. We decided that was integrating enough of what that program was aimed for without the segregation. It would have been a high school within a high school. I don't like that. I don't like that we segregate kids out that are, so
there wasn't going to be a Muncie Central and a Muncie Vocational High School?
No, not at all. Not at all. And, its idea of tech was a step higher than our Muncie Area Career Center. No, that's interesting, because until I looked at this, that I had forgotten that.
Me too. Some school board members are on record as saying that some local realtors are quite critical of the Muncie schools, in some cases even steering prospective home buyers away from the community schools. What's your view of that?
Absolutely. Well,
Okay.
as you well know, I taught at the College of Architecture for 38 years.
Okay.
I can't tell you how many faculty prospects I hosted.
Okay.
And they have told me absolutely
Okay.
that, first of all, two things. Number one, some of them wanted to live in historic neighborhoods
Right.
and had a devil of a time getting realtors to take them into the Emily Kimbrough district
Okay.
or the Old West End, saying you don't want to live there.
Right.
Okay? But more so, we have heard, and I'll say, quote, if you cannot get your kids into Burris, unquote, you want to go
Yeah.
and move out to Yorktown.
Even though Burris is a much different place than it was when we came here.
Very different,
Yeah, totally
very
different,
different. With the
yeah.
academy coming and
Yep,
many other
yep.
things, it is not the school you and I knew
No, that's right.
back in those days.
No.
But yes, that, I'm sorry, that is, and I'm good friends with some realtors, and I told them that, and they said, oh, well, that's illegal. I said, it may be legal,
Right.
but believe me, I've heard from people looking
Right.
at properties, so.
What long-term effect do you think having a single high school will have on Muncie's sense of community?
Well, and this came up during the discussion, when we win our 9th state basketball championship, this will be a day of celebration.
Oh, yeah.
And this is very interesting. You talk about drawing in support from various places.
Yeah.
There was a group of people that got up and said, we need to merge our high schools because we need to be 4A again. I mean, that was their
No, I know,
number.
I've heard that.
You know, because
Yeah, sure.
when Northside was built and we
That's right.
divided
Same
the
thing.
into three parts.
You divide the talent pool into thirds.
Exactly. And of
That's right.
course, they always point to the fact that
Yeah.
Richmond
Yeah.
and Marion
Yeah.
never did that.
Yeah, that's
You know, Kokomo did it and came back to one high school.
Yeah, that's right.
So there's a lot of instances, and as you well know, the North Central Conference is a very strong athletic conference,
Oh,
and
yeah.
we measure a lot of things by that conference there. So that's one. The other thing, as you well know, is I think they marched in the Indy 500
Yeah,
parade,
yeah,
which
yeah.
I was proud to be with them.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
when they won the state band competition as the first combined band,
Yeah.
that was Hollywood.
Yeah.
You
No,
couldn't
no.
have
Yeah,
scripted that
That's right.
better.
That was Hoosiers.
That was Hoosiers.
That's right.
That was the musical version of
Yeah,
Hoosiers.
yeah. I mean, I guess I'm asking you that question about the sense of community because you're doing this in the context of the south side of Muncie losing a major point of its identity.
Correct.
How do you begin to build that back up?
It takes time.
Okay.
And the only thing I can do, and I'm trying to think back,
Yeah.
obviously there were many students and parents of Northside students who felt the same disenfranchisement when that school was closed. Now,
I had a daughter who graduated from Northside, and my son was a graduate of Central. I just
Oh, not to the degree.
No.
Nowhere to the degree.
Yeah, okay.
But
Yeah.
to be very honest, when we decided to hang the Northside banners for volleyball
Right.
in the field house now,
right.
that meant something to some
Yeah.
people. Told me that means something, that you've recognized, the
Yeah.
three schools, because Northside kind of came and went, and a lot of people today don't even know we
No,
had a
no.
third high school at that time.
Yeah.
But
Well, that's definitely true.
right.
Yeah.
But I think it's going to take, it may take another generation. I hate to say this because that's a long, but because we always said, and I lauded those kids when the first day the president gets to talk to the
Right.
student body.
Right.
And I lauded them. I said, in my mind, you are pioneers.
Yeah, true.
And I said, I hope that this year is something you remember for the rest of your life, that, you have set the standards which others are going to follow. And I have to say this, I had 3 or 4 students come up to me at the end, in all due respect to the others who spoke, and said, you were the only one that made me feel this was really special today.
Oh,
So I took that as a compliment.
yeah,
you know.
so I mean, I think your
But-
view, and I think I share this, is that time heals.
Time heals. I think it's going to take, because we always said the students are going to be fine. And one of the things that led to that is, it's amazing how many of these kids play on the same AAU clubs
sure, that's
in the
right.
summer, Muncie.
Yeah.
They belong to the same churches.
Yeah, and all kinds of sports.
Social media.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You know, it's amazing.
Yeah,
So
sure.
in a way, a lot of them already knew each other. You know, and they have come together incredibly well. There's two generations of parents and grandparents that you know, have lost something, and I use the word lost. They really feel a loss. I was the one who, during the Southside redevelopment charrette, you know, absolutely talked about that school as much more than a educational building. I mean, it was the heart and soul of that community, and had a certain ambiance and a certain sense about it that really was laudatory. I mean, they, you know, I also had my, and I finally said this, that I said this in public. Again, I get to that point, and as Carmen says, you just go one sentence too far. But I said, and I'm tired of there being a two-tier educational system in this community. And you know, I said, no. I said, I'm sorry. You know, don't tell kids that they're not being held to the same standards as Central kids. I mean, that we know right there you're putting them in a situation. So.
Well, there's a lot of symbolism in the nickname of those athletic teams.
Oh.
I mean, the fact that it was Rebels and not giraffes or bears or something like that.
Hey,
that
Rebels,
meant something.
And their logo is the cannon.
That's right.
You know, I mean, you know, the battle is still raging here.
Yeah.
And, you know, we had a number of people, you know, it's interesting, who, and I'll give Tim Heller credit, boy, he was not going to fool around with this. There was a lot of support that we should change the colors and the mascot. You know, do away with both. And I even said, so in concept, what we're doing is we're closing 2 schools and opening 1.
Yeah, that's right.
And that would mean, and Tim Heller said, I'm not going to, we're Bearcats and we're purple and white. Anybody that doesn't like it. And so we had kids who would say, I grew up, I'm never going to wear purple and white. I mean, these people were, and then we had kids, and there was one girl, and I don't remember her name, but she got up there, and she was going to be a senior this year. She said, you know, she said, I've got 3 other siblings, and they all have their Muncie Southside High School diplomas hanging on the wall. And she said, and I'm going to have, so I'm the one that requested Tim contact the state to see if this year, for the class of 2015, they can earn Southside High School diplomas.
Really? So it's just for 1 more year?
1 more year. Okay. But that's the one that I think is important. You know, because the juniors are going to have 2 years there, so it's half of their high school. But I felt for this young lady, I said, you know, what the hell is it going to matter? And the state said it's strictly up to the local school board.
Oh, okay.
So a little thing, but important.
Well, I mean, the symbolism is no small thing. Because
it isn't.
I can remember back in the late 70s, early 80s, we were doing the Middletown Film Project, and we're filming basketball games at the Southside. You got all these New Yorkers in here doing this film, and you walk in the Southside gym, and these guys are waving Confederate flags.
Yeah.
So I said, I guess the symbolism really does mean something here.
Yes, it does. There is no doubt, and you know, and I think what's really interesting is we had 3 or 4. They weren't even high school, maybe middle school kids get up there and said, you know, I was bred to be a rebel.
Right.
I was born and bred to be a rebel. I mean, you know, like, whoa, you know. No, there was no doubt that I think there was a closer sense of being a rebel than being a Bearcat. And Bearcats are pretty damn devoted to that school, as you know.
I noticed you're wearing a purple sweater tonight.
Oh, absolutely. You know what I did? I swear, Carmen will back this up. Okay? The year when I started as president, I went out and bought $150 worth of purple clothes, ties, shirts, sweaters, and every board meeting,
I always wear purple.
I always wear purple.
I love it. Well, those are all the formal questions I have, but as with all of my oral history project interviews, I'd like to give you the opportunity to add anything that you might wish to add.
No, I think I just need to give you a little history. As you well know, I grew up in New York.
Right, sure.
Grew up in, as I like to tell people, an Italian-American family who thought New Jersey was a western state. You know people like that.
Oh, sure.
You know, who had no idea of what this place called Indiana was. And when I came back from my interview in 67, Marv had already interviewed.
Right.
And neither of us would have come here if it wasn't.
Marv, for the record, being Marv
Roseman, a classmate at Columbia University with me, graduated in 67.
Yeah.
We both were fortunate to get traveling fellowships to go to Europe.
Right.
So in 5 days, we went from Paris to New York to Muncie.
Yeah.
Now, the word culture shock doesn't quite do that justice. But anyway, I'll never forget going back, and of course, all my relatives saying, well, what's it like there? And I had flown to Europe already because I had relatives in Italy. I'd never flown west of the Hudson River.
Right.
I said, well, you know, you get about halfway across Ohio and you look down and suddenly this grid,
Yeah,
this agricultural grid, mile starts to really become dominant. And then I said, I'll tell you how dominant the grid is. Besides all the cities laid out in the Jeffersonian grid,
Right.
said they cut their pizza into grids.
Right.
And my
True.
Italian friends go, Jesus Christ, that's a sacrilege. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
You know, Pizza King with
How
the...
well I know. Yeah.
So that I think, you know, the only time I knew about Muncie was we had read Middletown.
Yeah, right.
In I think it was an urban sociology
Right,
class.
sure.
And so I knew about this city and I understood it. And of course, as you well know, the Hudson Valley has gone through losing, I mean, many years ago, lost its industry
Right.
that was located.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the latest thing was losing IBM and
Right.
more of the second generation
yeah.
into 60,000 IBMers. I
Yeah.
mean,
the General Electrics in Schenectady and places like that.
yeah, locomotive company up there, I think.
Sure.
But anyway, you know, the thing that has always struck me, and it came home again about that thing saying, obviously he's not a New Yorker. It's just always interesting how every so often that idea that you weren't born here, you didn't graduate from one of the two high schools, and somehow you're still suspect.
Yeah. No, that's right.
You know, and
No.
that's fine. And I hate, you know, I'm going to be very, probably if an Indiana kid had moved into Peak School, New York,
Yeah.
and had gone to school with us,
Right.
we would have said, you're from where? You know?
To say nothing of being the head of the school board.
Yeah, exactly. Being head of the school, but I know I've lost all my accent, but you know,
Yeah,
that,
right.
you know, but no, it's a, you know, and as you know, my wife and I retired here. We love this community.
Sure.
And the reason I ran was two reasons. Number one, because being involved in, I hope, trying to advocate for a better Muncie, without a good school system,
Yeah.
I mean,
There's no hope.
yeah, no, you know, you're rowing uphill,
Yeah,
rowing
that's
upriver.
That's
The other thing is both my boys graduated from
Right.
there. And as you well know, Muncie Central had received 3 Fs in a row from the state.
Right.
And fourth year, they were on the verge of possibly being taken over. And I guess this is the father in me saying,
Sure.
I just can't let
Yeah.
my kid's high school become this,
That's
you
right.
know. So I figured I was retired, I had the time, and as I tell people, and you might want to cut this, but I always told people, they said, you know, people would say, what in God's name were
Yeah.
you thinking when you ran? Jokingly, I said, well, I was inebriated one morning, and it came down to two things. Either get a tattoo on my butt or run for school board. And most of my friends have said I made the wrong decision.
Well, then let me add this one as a kind of postscript. But now you've made a decision not to run again.
Correct. And it was a tough decision. Number one, I'm 70 now.
Right.
And, you know, I'm looking to, my wife and I love to travel.
Yeah, right.
I'm also, when I became president this year, for the first time, I did not teach one course. I've always taught another course.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
And I've been teaching them on projects in Haiti.
Right.
Very fortunately, we have 2 projects going in Haiti in the office, and
Right.
they're taking time. I want to be able to go down there. And very honestly, I don't like missing board meetings.
Oh, okay.
So you're really on a 2-week
Right.
kind of schedule.
Right.
And I figured I've given my 4.5 years, feel like 8
I was
sometimes.
going to say, it feels like 8 to me.
Yeah, and the other thing, and
More
he
than
doesn't
that.
believe this,
Yeah.
but, you know, I think that it would be rough without Tim Heller as superintendent, because I just have such respect for him. We've gotten along great. And we have breakfast every Friday morning. We're both in town. We do about 10 minutes of school, and then we speak sports for the rest of the time. He's a Reds fan to the core, and a great sports fan.
Yeah.
Great sports fan. But no, I think I've you know,
You
I've
paid,
given.
you paid your dues.
I've paid my dues, and I think my parents are very happy because they were both very much involved in community matters.
Yeah.
Starting the volunteer fire departments.
Yeah.
My mother served as secretary of the PTO for my elementary school when I was still a sophomore in high school, because she did such a good job. They kept saying, "Oh, Mrs. Costmarie, you can't go," you know. So I grew up in a house. That's what you did. You know, you gave back to the.
It was
you know that
public service. Sure, same thing.
Public service is part of what you do.
Well, did you know when you ran for the school board that this issue was going to come to a head?
I did. I didn't quite know the timing of it,
Okay.
but I certainly knew because the Blue Ribbon Task Force, I mean, I resigned from it. So I understood that the flywheel was at least in motion for it. And I guess this is maybe a little bit self-serving, but I also thought as an architect I could bring something to the equation in terms of physical facilities, in terms of that there.
But you also, I guess, must have known that the fiscal reality was coming.
Oh, absolutely.
Or the day of decision was coming because of the fiscal reality of the city's budget. Okay.
No, there was no doubt. I knew that eventually one day we just weren't going to be able to maintain the number of buildings we were. I was also seeing what had happened to other districts. You know, that were also consolidating in terms of, you know, losing population.
Well, especially Anderson.
Oh.
I mean, all you had to do was look to the west.
Oh my gosh, and everybody said, don't do what Anderson did, you know.
Yeah.
By the way, one of the things that, and I think the newspaper, you know, at one point, the notion of the North Walnut Street Fieldhouse, which is the real building, came up for, well, what are you going to do with that building?
Right.
Well, you know, we're not going to do anything with that building.
It's not the wigwam. It's not the wigwam.
Well, no, it's not the wigwam. But the other thing is about that building, interestingly enough, maybe it has to do with the Christmas sing. Maybe it has to do with the sectionals being played there. But the whole community does kind of endorse that building. That's not a that's not a central building. That's a Muncie building. You well know.
Well, Maury Manny's all the time. When we do games on the radio, would always say, "You can't call this the Muncie Central Field."
No,
it's the North Walnut Street.
And that's why I said that, because I know Maury would have corrected me. And that is an example of a building that, in a sense, talks about the unity of a community. And you know, the Christmas sing will come up, and every single student will be in there. And again, it's one of the few things that's really lasted through generations here.
True.
So.
Well, again, I want to thank you for taking the time to participate in our project.
Absolutely, my pleasure. It's great to have you back from Montana, and hope you had some great fishing up there.
We did. It was
great.
Always a good place to be. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Okay.